I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're checking in with SUNY Chancellor John King to discuss the public higher education landscape here in New York. Thanks for making the time, Chancellor King.
Great to see you, as always.
Same here. So the big state budget push from the governor in higher education for 2 years in a row now would probably be the creation and subsequent expansion of the SUNY Reconnect program, which, for listeners who aren't familiar, covers the cost of associate's degrees for New York adults looking to work in in-demand fields. What sort of changes in enrollment at community colleges did you see last year that maybe you're attributing to this program?
Yeah, we're very excited about SUNY Reconnect. We saw a 5% overall increase in community college enrollment last fall. I think the advertising for Reconnect was a big driver there. About 5,600 students were Reconnect students, but lots of students had their financial needs covered by federal and state aid. They just wouldn't have known if not for the Reconnect clarity of message that community college is free and that covers tuition, fees, books, and supplies. And we had students in advanced manufacturing, healthcare, green jobs, as well as cybersecurity and IT. And the governor in this year's budget is expanding the program to now also include logistics, emergency management, and air traffic control. So we're excited to see even more students this fall.
And how was the experience for community colleges trying to ramp up their capacity to handle the increase this past year, and what are they doing to get ready for, potential continued increase in the future?
Yeah, there was this small portion of the funding that was set aside for capacity building. We also got an operating aid increase in community colleges last year and again this year, which now marks 3 years in a row of increased operating aid for community colleges. That's the first time we've seen that in decades. So that's hugely helpful. With those operating aid dollars, they're able to invest in things like nursing simulation labs and equipment for their advanced manufacturing program. That's really important. We continue to struggle with meeting as much nursing demand as there is. So we continue to add seats because the state is really facing a significant nursing shortage, and we can't do enough to add nursing slots. So we continue that work.
Well, I think there is a recognition nationally that community colleges are a great deal, and that with an associate's degree, you can launch a career in a meaningful field. And given that backdrop, we're seeing increases in community college enrollment in other states where they aren't offering something like the SUNY Reconnect program. So is there any sort of benefit analysis that SUNY is doing to figure out, do we actually need to provide this for free? Will we still see an increase in adults going for nursing degrees or other degrees in in-demand fields without this type of incentive?
We certainly think it helped, but I think
I bet it definitely helped because it's free.
Yeah. But the larger goal for the governor really is to tackle the broader affordability challenge. I think Governor Hochul's been really clear that she wants to make it easier for folks to navigate the current economy. And I just finished up visits to all 29 of our community colleges that are participating in the program. And one of the things I was struck by talking with the students is just how life-changing it is. Folks saying things like, with my bills, with raising my kids, I just couldn't find the dollars to be able to go back to school. And I'm struggling economically. I'm not happy in my job. But now, because of Reconnect, I'm able to go back to school. I'm pursuing a nursing degree. When I'm done, I'm going to make 80, 90 grand a year. It's going to be life-changing for me and my family. So I really think it's about how Governor Hochul sees the role of government as giving people that helping hand, people who are working hard, who are trying to get ahead, and Reconnect is helping them realize the American dream.
Well, thinking about another population that you're trying to educate and provide access to higher education, there's those New Yorkers behind bars. And we spoke with a SUNY official about this initiative back in 2022. And at the time, they said there were 13 SUNY campuses offering college degrees in about 20 prisons. And they said the estimates from the Department of Corrections was about 1,800 students were enrolled in program. And that included private programs as well. What does that landscape look like now? Because I know there has been a greater recognition from the Hochul administration as well as the legislature that there is a societal benefit to trying to educate people behind bars. Does the picture look demonstrably different than what I just described?
Yeah, I'd say there's been modest growth over the last couple of years. We would have grown more quickly, but there have been certainly some challenges in the state correctional
That's a good point. There was a
facilities.
strike last year.
Yeah, so that certainly disrupted a lot of our programs because, it has to be secure for the faculty members to come onto campus. There's some work that the folks working at the correctional facility have to do to get the students into the classroom, and that was disrupted for a period. But now we're back on track. We've got programs in 24 correctional facilities, and we will grow this fall to 29 correctional facilities. We want to continue to grow the program. We've got just in SUNY alone over 1,000 students participating. That will be over 1,200 next fall. So we continue to grow, but the truth is we'd like to grow more quickly. We were glad to see in this year's state budget the inclusion of $250,000 for capacity building work that we are doing to launch more of these programs. That was a really powerful statement for the state to put dedicated funding for higher education in prison into the budget. And I'm grateful to Senator Salazar for her leadership on that, especially.
What about the buy-in from the prisons themselves and ensuring that there are staff and guards to provide this programming? Because we hear in other areas that programming has been limited in part because there's not the personnel, but also maybe because philosophically there's not as much of an interest in that. Is that something you're having to combat at all?
We've been really lucky. Commissioner Marticello really believes in the program. Actually, he and I just did a graduation together at Mohawk Correctional Facility for a group of students who completed their associate's degrees at Herkimer Community College. And he talked in his remarks about his deep commitment to this program. He was recalling that one of my first calls when I became chancellor more than 3.5 years ago was with the commissioner. I wasn't even in my first day of the job yet, and I called him to talk specifically about wanting to grow this work. So he's been a great partner. And I would say my experience in the correctional facilities is the folks there will tell you that having higher education and prison programs actually improves quality of life within the facility. It gives students something to look ahead to. You often see more people signing up for GED classes because they want to get their high school equivalency so they can move on to a higher education and prison program. The students often become leaders within the community at modeling positive behavior and hopefulness about their future.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with SUNY Chancellor John King. Well, I want to turn to another recurring issue you and I have talked about, and that has to do with the state support for some of the SUNY schools that are seeing issues with their bottom line, so to speak. And the recurring problem for a lot of these campuses has been a decline in enrollment. And we've talked about needing to right size their operations, sort of become more nimble, focus on what makes them unique, what drives kids to those campuses. But one that sort of stands out to me, and maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, is SUNY ESF in the Syracuse area, which has not had the same population issues and is still facing major deficits. And I'm wondering what you view as the long-term stability of that program and whether that is a unique case that warrants additional funding given why they're seeing their financial issues.
Yeah, and there are some unique challenges at ESF. One of them is they haven't been able to grow as much as they would like because they don't have enough campus housing. So one of the things that was included in this year's state budget was the ability for us to begin a new dorm project at ESF, which will allow us to have more housing, not only for undergraduates, but also graduate students at ESF. That'll be very helpful for their long-term financial health. definitely when President Mahoney came in, she found there was already a deficit. There was some decision making years back where the staffing had grown more quickly than the student enrollment. She's taken some steps, including a voluntary separation incentive to address that. And we are confident that within the next 2 years, they will be back to a balanced budget, which they haven't had since before President Mahoney began her tenure.
Is there any plan, though, to inject any additional operating dollars into SUNY ESF above and beyond what they might ordinarily expect to help bridge this transitional period as they do, regain their financial footing, so to speak?
Thanks to Governor Hochul and the legislature, we've seen very significant increases in funding, almost $500 million now over the last four budgets for the SUNY system. And ESF has certainly benefited from that. I think their level of state funding has gone up more than 30% over that time period. So they continue to get additional resources. There was also provision in the budget for a capital investment in a mass timber institute at ESF, which is an area where ESF faculty are uniquely positioned to help the state lead in a new area of kind of the sustainability economy, if you will. So I'm excited about that. We also are doing some work at System to help them with managing the costs of the very large amount of land they're responsible for in the Adirondacks. So we're doing everything we can to make sure they get to stability, but I want to give credit to President Mahoney and her team and the faculty there who've worked together to move the campus towards financial sustainability. And ultimately, that's work we're doing across all 64 campuses. We know that for SUNY to be healthy long term, each of our campuses needs to achieve financial health and balance between their revenues and expenses.
Well, lastly, I want to turn to an issue that we spoke with Assemblymember Mikhail Solage about recently, and that has to do with the college sports athletes and the idea of employee protections for them, regulating name, image, likeness. And this is an issue with SUNY, even though we might not necessarily have the most high-profile college athletes. We do have some D1 athletes here in New York. And when you look at that playing field, what do you think needs to be done? And is it something where the SUNY system needs to be stepping in? Is this where the state legislature needs to be doing laws? Is it up to the individual campuses? Or does the status quo, as it looks right now, make sense to you?
Look, it's a really uncertain environment. The head of the NCAA recently said he is hopeful that there'll be congressional action this Congress on this issue. It's an environment where colleges are really struggling to adjust. At the end of the day, for us at SUNY, we think sports are an important part of our campus community. We want students to be able to participate in them. We want students who have an opportunity to earn some extra money through name, image, and likeness to have that opportunity. I think that's appropriate. But we are sort of waiting to see how this unfolds at the federal level. I think that will then determine going into next legislative session how the New York State legislature should respond.
And what about colleges deciding to pay the players directly, offering some sort of stipend? Is that a decision that could be left up to individual SUNY campuses, or is that something that would have to get run by SUNY Chancellor John King?
I think we're pretty far from that in terms of our sports programming. We have Division I teams at our university centers, as you know, but that issue of directly paying student athletes largely is driven by the teams that have big television contracts that have huge revenues that they can direct to student sports. We're pretty far from that at the moment at SUNY.
And what about this other debate about something like workers' compensation benefits for student athletes? Is that something that would put a major dent in SUNY finances if individual campuses had to shell out for these costs?
Look, it's a significant potential future cost if every campus were responsible for compensating students when they have significant injuries. I think that's another issue that's going to get resolved in this congressional discussion about the future of college sports. The tradition has been to see college sports as more of an extracurricular activity. But obviously, the huge television contracts and the huge money in the top Division I football and basketball areas has shifted that conversation. The other challenge that Congress is going to have to sort through is that's where the revenue is. Big time basketball and football. But then how do you have rules that make sense when you're talking about students who are on the swim team or on the lacrosse team where there isn't that same level of revenue?
Well, we've been speaking with SUNY Chancellor John King. Chancellor King, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Great to talk with you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.